Image hash, breaking self-imposed limits. The discipline of mind and destiny in the philosophy of Napoleon Hill. Introduction. The uncomfortable truth most people never face. According to Napoleon Hill, the greatest tragedy of human life is not failure, it is unlived potential. Most people do not fail because they are incapable. They fail because they quietly accept a version of life that is far smaller than what they are capable of becoming. They call it realism. They call it humility. They call it knowing their place. Napoleon Hill called it something else entirely. Open quote, mental slavery, close quote. From decades of studying the world's most powerful achievers, Hill arrived at a conclusion that still unsettles people today. Open quote, what the mind can conceive and believe, it can achieve, but only after it is broken free from the limits it placed upon itself. Close quote. This work is not written to motivate you for a moment. It is written to restructure the way you see yourself, because Hill understood one fundamental law. You never rise in life beyond the image you hold of yourself. Before wealth appears, before recognition arrives, before authority is granted, something far more important must happen first. The internal ceiling must collapse. Until that moment, effort is wasted. Ambition is diluted. Discipline feels exhausting, because no matter how hard you push, you cannot outperform the boundaries your own mind enforces. Napoleon Hill did not teach people how to work harder. He taught them how to think at a higher altitude. And that is where the journey of breaking limits truly begins. Chapter 1. Limits do not exist in reality, only in the mind. Napoleon Hill asserted a principle that contradicts nearly everything society teaches. Open quote, man's only real limitations are those he accepts in his own mind. Close quote. Read that again carefully. He did not say circumstances are irrelevant. He did not deny hardship, inequality, or adversity. What he exposed was something far more dangerous. Circumstances do not defeat people, conclusions do. Every limitation you believe in today began as a thought, not a fact. I am not smart enough. I don't have the right background. People like me don't succeed at that level. These statements feel harmless. They feel reasonable. They feel protective. But Hill understood their true nature. They are orders given to the subconscious mind, and the subconscious mind obeys without question. The silent construction of mental prison walls. Mental limits are rarely dramatic. They are not announced. They are not chosen consciously. They are built slowly through repetition, a failure that was never reinterpreted, a criticism that was never challenged, a comparison that was never corrected. Over time, the mind stops asking, is this true? And starts acting as if it were permanent law. Napoleon Hill warned that the most dangerous enemy is not doubt itself, but unexamined belief. Because once a belief becomes accepted as truth, the mind stops searching for alternatives. And what the mind stops searching for, it never finds. Why most people never attempt greatness. Hill observed something disturbing during his research. Most people adjust their desires to fit their perceived limitations instead of expanding their thinking to match their desires. They shrink the dream so they don't have to confront fear. They lower the goal so failure feels less painful. They call it being practical. Napoleon Hill called it self-betrayal. Open quote, the man who limits himself because he fears failure has already failed in thought long before he fails in action. Close quote. This is why two people with identical abilities produce radically different results. One questions limits, the other obeys them. One treats circumstances as variables, the other treats them as verdicts. The law of mental acceptance. Hill taught that the mind operates by a simple, unforgiving law. Open quote. Whatever you accept as final, the mind treats as final. Close quote. If you accept low expectations, the mind delivers low outcomes. Fixed identity, the mind resists growth. External control, the mind abandons initiative. The mind does not argue, it complies. This is why people remain stuck for decades without realizing it. They are not trapped by reality. They are trapped by agreements they never consciously signed. Breaking limits begins with a dangerous question. Napoleon Hill insisted that transformation begins with a single act of courage, questioning what you have always assumed to be true about yourself. Ask, who told me this was my limit? What evidence proves this belief is permanent? What if this limit is simply untested potential? Most people never ask these questions, not because they lack intelligence, but because questioning limits threatens identity. And identity, once formed, fiercely defends itself. Hill understood this resistance. He warned that the mind will fight growth before it supports it. But he also made a promise, open quote, "The moment a man refuses to accept a limitation, his mind begins searching for ways around it," close quote. That moment is the beginning of power. From acceptance to expansion, Napoleon Hill did not encourage blind optimism. He encouraged deliberate mental expansion. Limits collapse not when you deny reality, but when you stop mistaking current conditions for permanent truth. You do not need to see the entire path. You only need to reject the belief that the path is closed. Because once the mind accepts that expansion is possible, it begins reorganizing behavior, perception, and effort automatically. This is not motivation. This is mental engineering. The first victory is invisible. Hill emphasized that the most important victories are invisible. No applause, no recognition, no external proof. Just a silent internal decision. Open quote, "I will no longer live inside conclusions that shrink my potential." Close quote. That decision does not change the world immediately, but it changes how you move within it, and eventually the world responds. In the next chapter, we will explore how Napoleon Hill believed this internal shift must be fueled by something stronger than logic, a force powerful enough to override fear, doubt, and habit, burning desire, the engine that turns expanded thinking into unstoppable momentum. If you want, I can continue with Chapter 2, Burning Desire, in the same depth and tone. Just say, continue. Image Chapter 2, Burning Desire, the force that collapses limits. Napoleon Hill discovered something that most people never understand, even after a lifetime of effort. Open quote. "No person ever breaks a major limit through logic alone." Close quote. Reason explains, motivation excites, discipline sustains. But only one force ignites transformation at the deepest level. Hill called it burning desire. According to Napoleon Hill, burning desire is not a wish, not hope, and not casual ambition. It is a state of inner compulsion so strong that the mind reorganizes itself around a single outcome. It is the difference between wanting success and refusing to live without it. Most people never experience this force, not because they are incapable, but because they dilute desire until it becomes harmless. Why desire, not talent, determines destiny. Hill's research revealed an uncomfortable pattern. Talent is common. Education is common. Opportunity is common. Burning desire is rare, and wherever it appears, limits begin to dissolve. He observed that men and women with ordinary intelligence repeatedly outperformed those with superior ability, not because they worked harder, but because they were driven by an inner fire that refused compromise. Open quote. "Desire is the starting point of all achievement," Hill wrote. Not a hope, not a wish, but a keen, pulsating desire which transcends everything else. Close quote. When desire reaches that level, the mind stops negotiating with fear. It stops asking, "What if I fail? What will people think? Is this realistic?" Instead, it asks, "What must be done? What must I become? What price must I pay?" And once that shift occurs, limits lose authority. Weak desire creates strong limits. Napoleon Hill was brutally honest about why most people remain confined to average results. Their desire is too weak to challenge their fears. They want success, but not enough to endure discomfort. They want freedom, but not enough to confront uncertainty. They want greatness, but not enough to release their old identity. So the mind does what it always does in the absence of strong direction. It defaults to safety. And safety is where limits thrive. Hill emphasized that a weak desire does not fail loudly. It fails quietly through delay, distraction, and endless preparation. This is why people remain stuck while believing they are trying. Burning desire is an identity shift, not an emotion. One of Hill's most misunderstood teachings is this: burning desire is not emotional excitement. It is a decision that alters self-definition. When desire becomes burning, the question is no longer, "Can I do this?" The question becomes, "Who am I if I don't?" At that moment, the old identity, the cautious one, the conforming one, the self-doubting one, begins to fracture. Hill observed that every major breakthrough begins with an internal declaration. Open quote, "I will not accept a future that contradicts my potential." Close quote. This declaration does not require confidence, it creates it. How burning desire reprograms the subconscious. Napoleon Hill understood that the subconscious mind is the real gatekeeper of limits. Logic speaks to the conscious mind. Desire speaks to the subconscious. And the subconscious controls habits, attention, perception, automatic behavior. When desire is intense and emotionally charged, it bypasses resistance. It enters the subconscious as a command, not a suggestion. Hill explained that once this happens, the mind begins noticing opportunities previously ignored. Fear is reinterpreted as feedback, not danger. Persistence becomes natural, not forced. This is why people with burning desire often appear lucky. They are not. They are mentally aligned. The price of burning desire. Hill never romanticized this force. He made it clear. Burning desire demands payment. It will cost you comfort, old relationships, familiar routines, the approval of people who think small. Most people unconsciously reject burning desire because they sense its cost. They prefer controlled dissatisfaction to uncertain expansion. But Hill warned, open quote, "Those who refuse to pay the price of greatness will always pay the price of regret," close quote. Burning desire does not negotiate with excuses. It demands alignment. Desire as a limit-destroying weapon. Napoleon Hill taught that burning desire performs three critical functions in breaking limits. 1. It overrides fear. Fear cannot dominate a mind consumed by purpose. 2. It sustains persistence. Desire fuels action long after motivation fades. 3. It reshapes belief. Repeated desire, emotionally reinforced, becomes belief, and belief defines reality. Without burning desire, affirmations are empty. Visualization is weak. Discipline collapses under pressure. With burning desire, the mind becomes an ally instead of an obstacle. Why most people are afraid to want more. Hill identified a subtle psychological trap. People fear desire because desire exposes responsibility. If you want deeply, you can no longer hide behind excuses. You can no longer blame circumstances. You must either pursue or admit you chose not to. So many people choose numbness instead. They lower desire to avoid accountability. Hill considered this the greatest self-inflicted limitation of all. The moment desire becomes dangerous in a good way. Burning desire becomes unstoppable at a precise moment, when the pain of staying the same exceeds the pain of change. At that moment, limits feel insulting, fear feels irrelevant, action feels inevitable. Napoleon Hill believed this moment could be cultivated intentionally, not waited for. And that is where his next principle enters. What comes next? Burning desire ignites the engine, but without direction, it burns out. In Chapter 3, we will explore the mechanism Hill considered essential for giving desire form, structure, and inevitability. Autosuggestion, the art of programming the mind to obey your vision instead of your doubts. If you want me to continue with Chapter 3, autosuggestion, at the same depth and intensity, just say, continue. Image Chapter 3, autosuggestion, programming the mind to obey your vision. Napoleon Hill uncovered a principle so subtle that most people dismiss it, and so powerful that those who master it quietly separate themselves from the rest. He called it autosuggestion. According to Napoleon Hill, autosuggestion is not positive thinking, not blind affirmation, and not self-deception. It is the deliberate communication of ideas to the subconscious mind, repeated with emotion until they are accepted as truth. Hill's insight was clear and uncompromising. Open quote, "The subconscious mind makes no distinction between constructive and destructive thought. It accepts what is fed to it." Close quote. This single fact explains why most people remain confined to their limits even while trying to succeed. They are unknowingly programming failure while consciously desiring success. The mind is always being programmed by someone. One of Hill's most sobering realizations was this: if you are not consciously directing your mind, it is being directed by default. By fear-based media, repeated criticism, social expectations, past failures replayed endlessly. Autosuggestion is not optional. The only question is who is in control. Most people allow the external world to speak louder than their inner command. Hill warned that this creates an internal conflict. Conscious desire says, "I want more." Subconscious belief says, "This is unrealistic," and the subconscious always wins. Why logic alone cannot break limits. Napoleon Hill understood that logic operates only at the surface level of the mind. Logic convinces, repetition converts. The subconscious mind responds to emotion, repetition, vivid imagery. Not to argument. This is why people can intellectually understand that limits are false, yet still behave as if they are real. Autosuggestion bypasses debate. It installs belief through familiarity. What feels familiar begins to feel true. Autosuggestion as mental conditioning. Hill described autosuggestion as mental conditioning, no different from physical training. You do not build muscle with one workout. You do not reshape belief with one statement. But repeated exposure, especially when emotionally charged, produces adaptation. When properly practiced, autosuggestion weakens old limiting beliefs, strengthens new self-concepts, aligns emotion with intention. Eventually, action follows automatically, not because you force it, but because resistance dissolves. The fatal mistake most people make. Napoleon Hill emphasized that autosuggestion fails for one primary reason. People repeat words without emotional involvement. They speak affirmations while internally doubting them. The subconscious rejects neutrality. Hill wrote, open quote, any idea, plan, or purpose may be placed in the mind through repetition of thought, close quote. But repetition without feeling is noise. Autosuggestion works only when the desire is genuine, the emotion is present, the repetition is consistent. This is why burning desire must come first. Desire fuels autosuggestion. Autosuggestion directs desire. How autosuggestion breaks limits at the identity level. Limits persist because they are tied to identity. I am not the type of person who does that. People like me don't succeed there. Autosuggestion targets this exact layer. Through repeated, emotionally charged statements and visualization, the mind begins to normalize a higher self-image. What once felt impossible becomes unfamiliar, then neutral, then expected. Hill observed that when identity shifts, fear loses authority, procrastination fades, confidence appears without effort because behavior always follows identity. Visualization, giving the mind a destination. Napoleon Hill insisted that autosuggestion must include mental imagery. Words instruct, images command. When you repeatedly visualize yourself acting, succeeding, and operating at a higher level, the subconscious begins rehearsing that reality. And what the subconscious rehearses, the body executes. Hill was clear, open quote, the mind first creates the pattern, reality follows the blueprint, close quote. This is not mysticism, it is mental preparation. Athletes visualize performance. Leaders visualize outcomes. Achievers visualize identity. The mind cannot pursue what it cannot picture. The discipline of daily mental instruction. Hill taught that autosuggestion must be practiced daily, preferably in moments when the conscious mind is relaxed. Early morning, late night, moments of stillness. At these times, the subconscious is most receptive. Consistency matters more than intensity. A quiet, repeated message reshapes belief more effectively than occasional emotional bursts. Autosuggestion is not dramatic, it is precise. When autosuggestion becomes power, autosuggestion reaches its full power when three conditions are met. 1. Clarity. The mind knows exactly what it is being instructed to accept. 2. Emotion. The message carries feeling, not neutrality. 3. Repetition. The idea is reinforced until it feels natural. At this point, limits no longer need to be fought. They are simply replaced. Hill described this stage as alignment, open quote, when desire, belief, and expectation harmonize, the mind moves effortlessly toward its objective. Close quash. Why most people quit before it works. Autosuggestion fails quietly. There are no fireworks, no immediate proof, and most people abandon it before belief has time to crystallize. Hill warned that impatience is the subconscious's greatest enemy. The mind resists change before it supports it. But once acceptance occurs, momentum accelerates rapidly. This is why transformation often appears sudden from the outside. Internally, it has been forming for months. Limits. Collapse from the inside out. Napoleon Hill never taught people to fight the world. He taught them to command the mind that interprets the world. Autosuggestion is how that command is delivered, not once, not occasionally, but deliberately, every day. What comes next? Autosuggestion programs belief. But belief alone does not sustain progress. In Chapter 4, we will explore the principle that prevents collapse under pressure and keeps the mind stable when emotion, fear, and uncertainty attempt to take control. Self-discipline. The mastery of thought before action. If you want me to continue with Chapter 4, Self-Discipline of Thought, in the same tone and depth, just say, continue. Image Chapter 4, Self-Discipline of Thought, Mastering the Inner World Before the Outer One. Napoleon Hill believed that no principle separates the powerful from the powerless more decisively than self-discipline of thought. Not discipline of schedules, not discipline of habits, but discipline over what is allowed to occupy the mind. According to Napoleon Hill, most people do not fail because they lack willpower. They fail because they allow uncontrolled thoughts to sabotage their intentions. Hill stated it plainly, open quote, self-discipline is the ability to control one's own thoughts. Until this is mastered, no permanent success is possible. Close quote. This chapter marks a turning point in the philosophy of breaking limits, because it addresses a hard truth. An undisciplined mind will always betray even the strongest desire. Why most people lose momentum after starting strong. Napoleon Hill observed a pattern that repeats endlessly. People begin with excitement. They set goals. They feel inspired. Then doubt enters. Not dramatically, subtly. A question here, a worry there, a comparison, a moment of hesitation. Left unchecked, these thoughts multiply. And soon, the same mind that once felt powerful becomes a source of resistance. Hill did not see this as weakness. He saw it as lack of mental governance. Just as a city without law descends into chaos, a mind without discipline becomes hostile territory. The mind is a battlefield, not a playground. One of Hill's most uncompromising teachings is this, open quote, you cannot afford to treat your mind casually if you intend to live extraordinarily, close quote. Most people allow any thought to enter. Fear, envy, resentment, self-pity. They assume thoughts are harmless. Hill understood otherwise. Every thought carries directional force. It either moves you toward expansion or pulls you back into limitation. There is no neutral thinking. Emotional control is intellectual power. Napoleon Hill emphasized that emotions are not enemies, but unchecked emotions are tyrants. Fear distorts perception. Anger narrows intelligence. Discouragement weakens persistence. The undisciplined mind reacts automatically. The disciplined mind pauses, evaluates, and chooses. Hill wrote, open quote, the successful individual learns to dominate his emotional impulses instead of being dominated by them. Close quote. This mastery does not eliminate emotion. It places emotion under command. And once emotion is governed, limits lose their emotional fuel. Chash, the habit of thought selection. Self-discipline begins with a simple but demanding practice, choosing which thoughts are allowed to remain. Hill taught that destructive thoughts must be recognized immediately, interrupted decisively, replaced deliberately, not suppressed, not ignored, replaced. You do not fight darkness. You introduce light. When fear arises, it must be met with purpose. When doubt appears, it must be answered with decision. When distraction intrudes, it must be redirected. This is not willpower, it is mental leadership. Why discipline must precede action? Most people attempt to discipline behavior while leaving the mind untrained. Hill called this approach futile. Action flows from thought. Thought shapes emotion. Emotion fuels persistence. If thought is chaotic, action collapses. This is why some people appear disciplined for weeks, then abandon everything. Their behavior was disciplined. Their mind was not. Napoleon Hill insisted, open quote, control your mind and your actions will fall into order naturally, close quote. Mental stability under pressure. One of the clearest signs of self-discipline is emotional stability during uncertainty. Anyone can feel confident when conditions are favorable. Hill focused on the individual who remains composed when results are delayed, when criticism appears, when doubt is socially reinforced. This stability is not temperament, it is training. The disciplined mind refuses to panic. It understands delay as part of process, not evidence of failure. This single skill alone separates leaders from followers. The cost of undisciplined thinking. Napoleon Hill warned that uncontrolled thinking exacts a hidden price. Lost opportunities, abandoned goals, chronic indecision, a life of almost. Not because the person lacked potential, but because they allowed inner disorder to dominate. Limits thrive in mental disorder. Order dissolves them. Self-discipline as daily practice. Hill never framed self-discipline as intensity. He framed it as consistency. Small acts of mental correction, repeated daily, reshape character. Catching a negative thought, refusing to indulge self-pity, redirecting attention to purpose. These moments appear insignificant. Over time, they become destiny. The disciplined mind becomes a fortress. When thought is mastered, fear obeys. Napoleon Hill believed fear survives only where discipline is absent. Fear feeds on indecision, delay, mental clutter. Self-discipline starves fear by denying it attention. When fear is no longer entertained, it loses influence. Limits collapse not through confrontation, but through neglect. The quiet authority of the disciplined mind. There is a distinct presence to someone who has mastered thought. They are calm, deliberate, unshaken, not because life is easy, but because their inner world is governed. Hill considered this the highest form of power. Open quote, "He who controls himself controls his circumstances." Close quote. What comes next? Self-discipline stabilizes the mind, but stability alone does not guarantee endurance. In Chapter 5, Napoleon Hill introduces the quality that determines whether a person continues when enthusiasm fades and results delay. Persistence, the final test of belief. If you want me to continue with Chapter 5, persist in the same depth and authoritative tone, just say, continue. Image Chapter 5, Persistence, the final test of belief. Napoleon Hill regarded persistence as the ultimate separator between those who almost succeed and those who inevitably do. Not intelligence, not opportunity, not even desire. According to Napoleon Hill, persistence is the visible proof of invisible belief. Hill observed that belief which collapses under pressure was never belief at all, only enthusiasm. Open quote, "Persistence is the sustained effort necessary to induce faith," Hill wrote, "and faith is the foundation upon which all achievement rests." Close quote. This chapter confronts a reality most people avoid. The world does not reward intention. It rewards continuation. Why most people quit right before the breakthrough. Napoleon Hill introduced one of his most famous and unsettling ideas, the concept of the last great push. He discovered that nearly every major success is preceded by delay, resistance, discouragement, a sense that effort is pointless. This is not coincidence. Hill believed life tests seriousness at the exact point where quitting feels reasonable. Most people fail this test, not because they lack ability, but because they misinterpret delay as defeat. Hill warned, open quote, "Temporary defeat is nature's way of testing how badly you want something." Close quote. Persistence is not stubbornness, it is clarity under delay. Temporary defeat versus permanent failure. One of Hill's most powerful distinctions is this: there is no such thing as permanent failure except the decision to stop. Temporary defeat carries information. Permanent failure carries resignation. The persistent mind asks, what must be adjusted? What is this teaching me? How do I continue differently? The quitting mind asks, why is this happening to me? What's wrong with me? Why bother? Same event, different interpretation, radically different outcomes. Persistence is emotional endurance. Napoleon Hill emphasized that persistence is not about physical stamina. It is emotional endurance, the ability to continue without encouragement, act without validation, believe without visible proof. Most people depend on external reinforcement. When praise disappears, so does effort. The persistent individual becomes internally fueled. Hill described this as self-generated momentum. Once developed, it cannot be taken away. Why persistence is so rare. Persistence is rare because it demands emotional maturity. It requires tolerating uncertainty, loneliness, doubt from others. Hill observed that society trains people to seek comfort, not continuity. From early life, we are conditioned to stop when discomfort appears. Persistence reverses that conditioning. It teaches the mind a new rule. Discomfort is not a signal to stop. It is a signal to adapt and continue. The relationship between persistence and faith. Hill argued that faith is not the starting point. Persistence is. Belief strengthens after action is sustained. Each continued step reinforces identity. I am someone who does not quit. I move forward regardless of outcome. Delay does not define me. Over time, persistence creates faith. And once faith is established, limits dissolve rapidly. The inner dialogue of the persistent mind. Napoleon Hill paid close attention to self-talk. The quitting mind says, this isn't working. I'm wasting time. Others have it easier. The persistent mind says, results are forming. This is part of the process. My pace does not define my destination. Persistence is not blind optimism, it is trained interpretation. Why persistence requires a definite purpose. Hill insisted that persistence without purpose collapses. People persist only when they know why. This is why vague goals fail under pressure. A definite purpose anchors effort. When purpose is clear, pain becomes tolerable, delay becomes meaningful, effort becomes identity. Hill stated, open quote, "Definiteness of purpose fixes the mind so firmly that persistence becomes natural." Close quote. Persistence as a character trait. Napoleon Hill did not see persistence as a tactic. He saw it as character, a way of moving through life. Once persistence becomes part of identity, it extends beyond one goal. It affects relationships, health, leadership, decision-making. The persistent individual becomes difficult to stop, not because they resist force, but because they outlast it, the silent victory of continuation. One of Hill's most profound observations is this: persistence rarely feels heroic. It feels ordinary. Unnoticed effort, uncelebrated progress, unseen discipline. But over time, these quiet actions accumulate unstoppable force. Hill describes success not as explosion, but as inevitable convergence. When persistence becomes destiny, there comes a point where persistence transforms into certainty, not because success is guaranteed, but because quitting is no longer an option. At that point, limits lose relevance, fear loses urgency, doubt loses influence. The individual has crossed an invisible threshold. Hill believed this threshold separates dreamers from creators. What comes next? Persistence sustains the journey, but no one breaks great limits alone. In Chapter 6, Napoleon Hill introduces the principle that accelerates growth beyond individual capacity. The mastermind, the power of aligned intelligence. If you want me to continue with Chapter 6, Mastermind, in the same depth and authoritative tone, just say continue. Image Chapter 6, The Mastermind, Expanding Beyond Individual Limits. Napoleon Hill reached a conclusion that fundamentally redefined how limits are broken. Open quote, "No individual ever achieves extraordinary success alone," close quote. According to Napoleon Hill, the greatest accelerator of human potential is not effort, talent, or intelligence, but aligned minds working toward a common purpose. He called this force the mastermind, not a social circle, not networking, not casual collaboration. The mastermind is a deliberate alliance of minds that multiplies insight, dissolves blind spots, and collapses limits that would take a lifetime to overcome alone. Why the lone mind reaches a ceiling. Hill observed that even the most intelligent individuals eventually hit an invisible ceiling, not because they lack ability, but because the mind cannot see beyond its own conditioning. Every individual carries bias, habitual thinking, emotional blind spots, unchallenged assumptions. Left alone, these limitations reinforce themselves. The mind begins to mistake familiarity for truth. Hill warned, open quote, "The individual mind is powerful, but the collective mind aligned by purpose is invincible," close quote. The mastermind exists to break the echo chamber of self-thought. The principle of harmonic thought. Napoleon Hill introduced a concept far ahead of his time: harmonic vibration of thought. When multiple minds focus on a single purpose with mutual respect and intensity, something extraordinary occurs. Ideas accelerate, solutions appear unexpectedly, confidence strengthens, persistence deepens. Hill did not frame this mystically. He framed it as mental synergy. Where one mind stalls, another advances. Where one hesitates, another clarifies. Limits collapse not through force, but through expanded perception. Why environment determines identity. Hill emphasized that environment is not background, it is programming. You cannot consistently think beyond the dominant thinking you are surrounded by. If your environment normalizes limitation, ridicules ambition, rewards conformity, your mind will eventually comply, regardless of personal desire. The mastermind counteracts this influence by creating a new mental norm. In the presence of elevated thinking, your standards rise, your tolerance for excuses drops, your vision expands, not because you are pressured, but because expansion becomes familiar. Choosing the right minds is a strategic act. Napoleon Hill was precise. A mastermind is not formed by friendship. It is formed by alignment of purpose and values. Wrong associations do not merely fail to help, they actively reinforce limits. Hill advised selecting minds who challenge your thinking, hold you accountable to higher standards, Do not flinch at long-term vision. Quality outweighs quantity. 2 aligned minds outperform 10 distracted ones. The mastermind as a limit-destroying force. Hill identified 3 ways the mastermind destroys limits. 1, it multiplies perspective. What feels impossible alone becomes solvable collectively. 2, it stabilizes belief. Doubt weakens in the presence of shared conviction. 3, it accelerates learning. Mistakes are reduced through shared experience. The mastermind compresses time. What takes years alone may take months together. Why pride is the enemy of growth. One of Hill's sharpest warnings was directed at pride. Pride isolates. It convinces the individual that asking, listening, or aligning is weakness. Hill saw this as tragic irony. Those who refuse collective intelligence in the name of independence remain mentally dependent on their own limitations. The mastermind requires humility, but rewards it with expansion. The invisible contract of the mastermind. Napoleon Hill believed that a true mastermind operates under an unspoken agreement: mutual growth over individual ego, shared standards over personal comfort, long-term vision over short-term validation. When this agreement holds, something remarkable happens. Limits dissolve without struggle because they are no longer reinforced. From individual effort to collective momentum. One of Hill's most powerful insights is this. Open quote, momentum multiplies when minds align. Close quote, persistence becomes easier. Discipline becomes natural. Faith becomes reinforced. The individual stops fighting alone, and with that shift, exhaustion fades. The mastermind transforms effort into flow. Why most people never experience this power. Hill observed that most people avoid mastermind alliances for one reason: fear of exposure. Aligned minds reveal weak thinking, inconsistent commitment, hidden excuses. Growth demands visibility, and many prefer the safety of stagnation. Hill considered this a costly trade, the expansion that cannot be reversed. Once a person experiences true mental alignment, they cannot return to isolation comfortably. Their standards have changed. Their thinking has expanded. Limits that once felt immovable now feel artificial. This is the quiet revolution of the mastermind. What comes next? Aligned minds accelerate progress, but alignment alone does not guarantee permanence. In Chapter 7, Napoleon Hill presents the final and most demanding principle, the one that determines whether expanded power is sustained or self-sabotaged. Absolute responsibility, the moment a person claims full ownership of their destiny. If you want me to continue with Chapter 7, absolute responsibility, in the same authoritative depth, just say continue. Image Chapter 7, absolute responsibility, the moment power is claimed. Napoleon Hill concluded his philosophy of achievement with a principle so demanding that most people instinctively resist it: absolute responsibility. According to Napoleon Hill, no individual ever sustains greatness without first accepting total ownership of their life. Not partially, not selectively, but completely. Open quote. The moment a man takes full responsibility for his life, he gains full command over his destiny. Close quote. This chapter represents the final collapse of limits because it removes the last psychological refuge of the average mind: blame. Why blame is the ultimate limitation. Hill observed that blame feels comforting. It offers relief from accountability. It explains disappointment without requiring change. It preserves self-image at the cost of progress. People blame circumstances, timing, background, other people, systems. And while some of these factors are real, Hill made an uncompromising point. Open quote. Anything you blame, you surrender power to. Close quote. The moment responsibility is externalized, control disappears. Limits thrive wherever responsibility is avoided. The shift from victimhood to authority. Napoleon Hill did not deny hardship. He denied helplessness. Absolute responsibility does not mean pretending the world is fair. It means refusing to let unfairness dictate identity or outcome. The responsible mind asks, what can I control here? How can I respond differently? What must I become to overcome this? This shift is subtle but decisive. The individual stops reacting to life and starts directing it. Responsibility is not self-blame. Hill made a crucial distinction that is often misunderstood. Responsibility is not self-criticism. It is not guilt. It is not punishment. It is ownership. Self-blame weakens the mind. Responsibility strengthens it. Blame says something is wrong with me. Responsibility says, this is mine to solve. One collapses confidence, the other builds authority. Why most people avoid this principle. Absolute responsibility removes all hiding places. Once you accept it, excuses lose legitimacy. Complaints feel dishonest. Delay becomes a choice. Hill understood why this principle is avoided. It demands maturity. It demands the willingness to stand alone in accountability. But it also unlocks the highest form of freedom, the freedom to act without permission. Responsibility as a limit-destroying force. When responsibility becomes absolute, several things happen simultaneously. 1. Focus sharpens. Energy is no longer wasted on justification. 2. Decision-making accelerates. The mind stops negotiating with fear. 3. Identity stabilizes. You become someone who handles reality instead of avoiding it. Hill believed this state marks the transition from follower to leader, regardless of title. The end of waiting. One of Hill's most piercing observations was this: most people spend their lives waiting for confidence, for certainty, for permission, for conditions to improve. Absolute responsibility ends waiting. It replaces it with initiation. The responsible individual does not ask, when will it be my turn? They ask, what must I do next? Limits dissolve in motion. Responsibility and self-trust. Napoleon Hill believed self-trust is born from responsibility, not affirmation. Each time you take ownership and act, trust deepens, fear weakens, confidence solidifies. Self-trust is not a feeling. It is a record of kept commitments, and responsibility ensures commitments are made and honored. When responsibility becomes identity. At the highest level, responsibility is no longer a decision. It becomes identity. I am the one who handles this. I do not outsource my future. I adapt, I learn, I continue. Hill considered this the final stage of mental emancipation. Once reached, limits cannot return because the mind will no longer accept them. Conclusion: the collapse of limits is an internal event. Napoleon Hill never promised ease. He promised power to those willing to earn it internally. Limits do not fall because the world changes. They fall because the individual does. When desire becomes burning, belief is programmed deliberately, thought is disciplined, effort persists, minds align, responsibility is claimed. Limits no longer need to be fought. They become irrelevant. Open quote. You are the master of your fate when you master your mind. Close quote. This is not philosophy for comfort. It is philosophy for command. And once understood, it cannot be unseen. If you want, I can now edit this into a complete 3,000, 5,000 word manuscript, adapt it into a 60-minute authoritative speech, or structure it as a book chapter series. Just say the word.